Well, hey, Brett, good to be with you, man, and have you here from California, right?
Yeah, good to be with you, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yes, and you have two sons, and your wife is Kira, and you also live as a writer and an editor.
That's correct. Yeah, so I'm a full-time writer for the Gospel Coalition. My title is senior editor. It's a full, very busy job. Coalition works remote, so I work from home here in Southern California, but our other editors and writers, some of them live in Chicago, New York, Texas. So we're spread out, but it makes for, I think, a more interesting team dynamic to develop story ideas and figure out what's going on in the landscape of American Christianity and the church by having a kind of more diverse representation.
I would say that's true. As I've been reading your articles and following the Gospel Coalition for some time, it's amazing how you guys have a pulse, like you said, coast to coast on what's happening with the church. The topic, one of the things I want to talk about, or maybe the main thing I want to talk about, is church in the modern landscape that we're living in this COVID culture. You love the church. It's one of the reasons that I like reading you and finding what you have to say, is because I know that you love the church. You serve as an elder in your church, which I appreciate that, at Southlands Church in Santa Ana. You've published 2 of your 3 books that are published are really focused on the church, especially Uncomfortable. So you have 2 books, Uncomfortable, The Awkward and Essential Challenge of Christian Community, and then Hipster Christianity, When Church and Cool Collide. You love the church. You talk about the church. Your new book that comes out next year talks about the second tier of our spiritual diet should be the church, in the local church. Why does that come out so much in your writing, and why should it be important to us as well?
I think that what it boils down to for me is that I've seen in my own life how crucial church has been for shaping who I am, for shaping what I love, and for shaping my faith. And I've seen lots of people in my generation start to kind of walk away from the church, or to use this popular phrase, spiritual but not religious, or they want Jesus, but the church has a lot of baggage sometimes, and it's not a comfortable, easy experience. It's very often messy and difficult and uncomfortable, which is what I wrote about in Uncomfortable. But in spite of that, I think it's so vital for anyone, if you want to grow as a Christian, if you want to grow spiritually, you really do need community. And the same applies to our spirituality. So it's as old as the history of Christianity. It's vital to what it means to follow Jesus. And it's been important in my own life.
I really appreciate that. I mean, as a pastor, obviously, I know the importance of the church and feel called to it. In one of your bios, somewhere you said you're an aging millennial. I think maybe that was your Twitter bio or something.
Yeah, I'm on the old end of millennials.
Yes. And so am I. I'm kind of on that first couple years of it. But you're right that so many people in our generation and even younger, they talk about spiritual or religious, but church is not often something that we talk about. I've said often you're called to Christ, but you're also called to Christ's bride. And sometimes that's awkward, and sometimes there are hard things we face in the church, but that's part of what grows us.
Right.
We live in a time where church has been interrupted. Things are not as they were back in February or earlier.
Yeah.
What do you think are the positive things that the church has experienced in light of a COVID culture, in the current COVID culture, or kind of a post-COVID culture? What do you think are some of the positives that have come from this?
Yeah, I wrote an article in, I think it was April or May, about how COVID, it's kind of offering this winnowing experience in the church where so much of the comforts are being stripped away, and so much of kind of the nice to haves and the add-ons that we've added to church are gone, right? Like there's youth groups, children's ministry, mission trips, like so many things have been taken away, and that's hard. And it's we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of people, I think Barna found that 1 out of 3 church-going Christians has just kind of stopped going altogether during COVID-19. And we shouldn't be surprised because, there's not much, an online church isn't great. It's a fine alternative, but it's not the same. And it's not an ideal experience of church. And I get that. But what this is doing, I think, is it's forcing people to truly ask themselves, am I really committed? Am I really bought into church? Because if I am, I'm going to just be okay with this kind of subpar or just like different form of church for as long as I need to be. And I'm still going to be there, and I'm still going to show up, even if it's online, even if it's on Zoom. And I don't like online church. I don't like Zoom life group, small group meetings, right. But I do it anyway because it's essential to stay committed. So I think that's positive that I'm seeing is it's just forcing a simpler form of church. We shouldn't be committed to church if we're getting something polished and nice and shiny and comfortable out of it. We should be committed to church because Jesus wants us to be, and because we want to serve each other rather than be served.
That passage came to my mind in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. It's talking about something altogether different. He says there's going to be factions amongst you. But then he says there must be factions amongst you in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. And not that this is necessarily a faction, though we have our own factions to speak of that have come through this. This is definitely a time where we're able to see those who are called by God, rising up and staying faithful. Okay, so now let's talk on the negative side. There's been all of these interruptions. One of the hardest parts for church right now is that we've been placed in all sorts of restrictions in the name of safety or in the name of trying to keep people healthy. Our church has been open for 12 weeks. We're in Colorado, a little bit different than where you guys are at, but we've been open and we're meeting. But people have to use stanchions. They have to wear masks the whole time. There's a lot of things that are not the same about the way church once was. And specifically, the mask mandate has become a lightning rod for us at Grace Chapel. People are struggling with the masks. And you wrote an article on July 1st. There were 4 reasons to wear a mask, even if we hate it.
Yeah, so I hate wearing masks. And in fact, I'm skeptical of some of the government policies with regard to COVID. And so much in this whole pandemic has made me even less trustworthy of experts on every level. But in spite of that, maybe the masks help, maybe they don't. But I still wear one, and I still think that it's the Christian thing to wear them for a few reasons. The first one that I say in the article is just the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself that Jesus gives us. The original commandment, for Christians. So just love them like you would care for yourself. And the thing about masks, the experts and scientists are saying, is that they do offer your self-protection, but ultimately it's about protecting people you come in contact with in the off chance that you are carrying COVID without knowing it, and you could pass it on to others. And so even if it's just a 1% minuscule chance that I have it and I'm carrying it, and even if the mask only helps a little bit in stopping the transmission, I still think it's worth it. If we as Christians can save one life or help some people be healthy rather than get sick, that's the way that we love our neighbor. So that's the first and most foundational reason why I think we should wear masks. I think the second reason I gave in the article was just to respect authorities. And in the New Testament, there's a few passages that instruct to refer to government authority. And so if you're governor of or whatever form of government you're under, if they've mandated masks, and I think it's a Christian thing to do to abide by it. Now, the caveat with that is I think there are times when Christians are within their rights to disobey the government, specifically if the government is making it impossible for us to function as Christians, to preach the word of God, to evangelize. Then it would be disobeying God's word. But I don't think the masks issue qualifies. I don't think that wearing masks inhibits Christians from acting like Christians, from being the church. I think it's an inconvenience for sure, and no one likes wearing masks in church, but I don't think it prevents us from being the church. The third reason I think I talked about was bearing with one another in love, Christian liberty idea that Paul talks about in a few places in the New Testament, Romans 14. And this is just the idea that in matters of disagreement where you can have differences of opinion and you can have different convictions on the issue. And I think mask wearing is certainly one of those issues right now where people have very different convictions regarding it. I think Paul would say that the important thing is for those who feel free in the area of like not wearing a mask, they don't use that as a way to make the mask wearer stumble, so to speak. So the burden here is on the people who don't wear masks,
Yeah.
Just think about how can you honor them even though you personally feel like it's fine for you not to wear a mask. The fourth reason I give is about freedom and how sometimes American Christians confuse American freedom and kind of the Constitution's definition of freedom with the Bible's definition of freedom. And they're not the same. And I'm not saying that American concepts of freedom are bad. I love our Constitution. I love the rights that were guaranteed in the Constitution. But as Christians, the biblical notion of freedom should matter, right? So even though we're free in America, even though we can cite the First Amendment or claim our rights, the Christian thing sometimes is to lay down our rights and to serve, to become a servant for the sake of the gospel.
I love it, bro. I mean, I think that article, I reached out to you on Twitter minutes after I read it because I was like, this is what somebody finally needed to say, because I think we have to say that and realize in an American culture, when we talk about opportunity or freedom or use these words, we so breathe in what America's definition of that is, not what the Bible's definition of that is. So when is the line crossed? When does the government come in and say something that we should not say yes to? Maybe it isn't so much specific examples that I'm looking for, but how do we get to the point of knowing, okay, now you've crossed the line?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, timely question. A lot of churches are asking that question. For me, I think it boils down to if the government is making it impossible for the church to be the church in a meaningful sense, to be able to do the things that constitute what church is, preaching, singing, worshiping, the sacraments, being able to have communion, that's where I think it gets thorny. And you can make the argument that that's a bridge too far when the government intrudes to the point that a church can't meaningfully be the church that the New Testament describes and that Christians have always practiced. But with that, I would say I know a lot of churches that are just getting super creative, be within the guidelines that the government has laid down, and they're still making it work. They're carrying on with church in the same way they did before, just it looks different. So whether it's meeting outside or figuring out creative ways to do communion, keeping it sanitary and safe, new ways to do tithing and passing the offering plates and whatnot. Yeah. So you just have to start with the principle of, I want to respect the governing authorities and be creative in ways to respect them. But if it comes to a point where the government says churches can't meet in any capacity, then I think it comes to a point where civil disobedience might be in order.
That's good. Thank you. And I think that's one of the things we've wrestled with, even as elders, of what's the line. And we've watched what California churches have done, like Grace Community, and where they stood up against things. And Colorado feels like a California sometimes. And I think our governors see pretty eye to eye here. But we do have some ability to do things right now that are different than California. But we keep saying, so what if? And where's the line? And how far do we go with that? So
I actually think it's a good thing that there's churches that are filing lawsuits. Even if I don't agree with those, I think it just raises the conversation between church and state in a healthy way. It reminds the governing authorities, we're making it difficult at the very least for churches, and do we really want that? And I know our pastors have met pretty regularly with county leaders and governing officials throughout the COVID process. And that's just been a really healthy process and a good example of how the church should interact with governing officials in times like this that are really unprecedented, making sure that both sides feel heard and respected.
So one last question, back to the mask thing. You've written this book called Uncomfortable that encourages us to step into community. And let's be honest, stepping into community and having conversations, even if it's at Home Depot or the grocery store, with a mask on, that feels uncomfortable. But one of the things we've talked about is how can we attempt to overcome the difficulty of connecting with people when mask orders are in place. Do you have any thoughts that come to your mind about how we can keep stepping in? Any advice you'd give us on that?
Yeah, I think there's no one size fits all answer for that. I think it just takes trial and error and getting creative. I know some of the things we've done that I've enjoyed is just doing outdoor gatherings as much as possible, where you can just set up chairs 6 feet apart. You don't have to wear masks because, at least in California, the masks are only required if you can't social distance. So as long as you can have chairs 6 feet apart and not wear masks, it feels a little weird to sit 6 feet apart from people, but you get used to it. And I think there's still that community aspect. So I really do encourage churches, try to do in-person stuff as much as you can, as long as you're able to create that 6 feet of distance. We're trying to get creative this fall with our discipleship curriculum in our church, just launching a lot of new Zoom group for families and a Zoom group for young married couples. And like, I am going to lead a Zoom group for people who want to talk about politics and Christianity during the election season. But yeah, we're just trying to get creative with offering lots of opportunities for people who want to plug in. And sure, there's people out there who have Zoom fatigue, and the last thing they want to do is another Zoom thing. Yeah. But I also know there's people out there who are lonely and who right now are eager for more touch points and more community opportunities. So more opportunities for Zoom groups, and then some in-person small groups as well for people who feel comfortable going to an in-person group.
So what I hear you saying is, though we have to social distance, though we have to wear masks, don't neglect community. Find ways to be with other people.
Absolutely. I think that's where the church is defeated in this, is if we view the pandemic as an excuse to quit gathering together, to quit pursuing community. We need community now more than ever. I think that needs to be a big priority.
I want to encourage those who are watching and listening in, get a copy of your book, Uncomfortable. I think that'd probably be the one. I'd say go grab that one right away, but you should also pre-buy the Wisdom Pyramid, which comes out next year. Help with the pre-sales of that book. I can't wait for that, and hopefully we can talk again when that book comes out. I just want to remind those who are watching, you can grab a copy of my book, The End of Anxiety, which just came out. If you're dealing with anxiety, we have a free course and other downloads and things available at endofanxiety.com. Be sure to check out more of Brett's writing. Where can they find your writing? Where do you want to send them for your writing?
BrettMcCracken.com. And then the Gospel Coalition is just where I'm writing, usually once or twice a week.